Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast. How does a woman who supposedly doesn't exist become the beloved mayor of a small town and end up at the center of one of the most sprawling criminal conspiracies in modern history?
It is a question that honestly sounds like the back cover of a pulp thriller.
Right.
But every single piece of this is entirely real. And to even begin to untangle the answer, you really have to look at the geography and, well, the deeply ingrained culture of a very specific place in the Philippines.
Yeah, I want you to picture the setting here because the contrast is really what makes this story so unbelievable.
Totally.
So imagine a town called Bamban. If you drive a couple of hours straight north out of the sprawling metropolis of Manila, just taking the main highway, you eventually hit it.
And for decades, I mean, this place was the definition of sleepy.
Exactly. Roughly 80,000 people live there. And according to the reporting we are following today, which is titled The Mayor of Scamtown, until very recently, most Filipinos in the rest of the country had never even heard the name Bamban.
It just wasn't on the map in any meaningful way.
Right. You would drive into the town limits and basically just see low-rise cinder block buildings. The edges of the main road were crowded with, corrugated iron shacks, people selling really basic goods, maybe some vapes.
The article actually describes carts trundling down the street selling susong pilipit.
Oh, right. Freshwater snails.
Yeah, these little freshwater snails cooked in coconut milk. It was a very quiet, very agricultural, deeply provincial life.
But if you drove into that exact same town just a couple of years ago, that quiet rural picture completely fractured.
It was like a different universe.
Right in the center of Bamban, you would suddenly be hit by this jarring wave of aggressive modernization.
Gleaming, brightly lit, brand new storefronts that absolutely do not belong in a town with that specific economic footprint.
Out of nowhere, there is a Jollibee, which, is the massive, hugely popular Filipino fast food chain.
Right.
And there's a pristine new McDonald's, a KFC, a 7-Eleven, all of them shiny, heavily air-conditioned. And they all sprang up almost overnight.
And, towns like that don't just organically attract massive international franchises out of thin air.
They really don't. You don't get a sudden injection of corporate capital into a sleepy farming community without some kind of massive artificial catalyst.
Someone or something has to flip the economic switch.
Exactly. And in Bamban, that catalyst had a face, a name, and a very, very specific aesthetic.
We are going to trace a narrative today that honestly unfolds exactly like a documentary film.
It really does.
We were looking at a town that inexplicably got rich, the young, charismatic mayor who seemingly willed it into existence, the desperate man who threw himself out of a window to escape an absolute nightmare, and, well, the police raid that exposed a global human trafficking syndicate.
And all of that leading to this bizarre labyrinthine paper trail that exposed conspiracy reaching the absolute highest levels of organized crime.
Whiplash is just incredible.
It is. We are tracking transnational organized crime, hundreds of millions of dollars in laundered money, and global cyber fraud, all anchored in a place where the biggest news used to just be a local municipal dispute.
Right. It's wild.
So let's start with the catalyst herself. Who exactly was this new, highly unusual leader?
So her name was Alice Guo, and it's pronounced Guor, and she made history by becoming Bamban's very first female mayor.
Okay.
But what's crucial here is how she introduced herself to the electorate. The origin story she presented was perfectly, almost surgically, calibrated to appeal to a hardworking rural community.
Oh, so?
Well, she claimed she was a local girl. She told everyone her parents were Filipinos who owned a piggery right there in the provincial area.
She completely sold herself as a hometown success story. She claimed she grew up working on the family farm, helping the business expand from, pigs into poultry and fisheries.
Yeah, a real salt-of-the-earth narrative.
Right. And the article interviews this man named Fortunato Maya, who is a 70-year-old former town councilor. And he actually remembered her from years prior when they were both volunteering on a local politician's campaign.
And he described her as having this undeniable grit and enterprise. She was young, pretty, wore glasses with a smooth, round face and long, shiny hair.
But Fortunato also noticed something highly specific about her social strategy, didn't he?
Yes, he did. And this is key. Rather than socializing with people in her own demographic, people in their 20s or 30s, she exclusively sought out the town elders.
Interesting.
She would sit with the entrenched political class of Bamban and discuss business. And she would respectfully address these older men as Lolo for grandfather or Tito for uncle.
Ah, so she was very deliberately weaving herself into the traditional patriarchal fabric of the town's leadership.
Exactly. She was building this reputation as a respectful, hardworking local businesswoman.
But then we hit 2021, and the narrative starts to crack, right?
It really does. Suddenly, Alice Guo is displaying a level of wealth that is frankly absurd for her supposed background.
I mean, I don't care how many pigs you sell. Agricultural margins in the rural Philippines do not buy you a fleet of luxury vehicles.
No, they definitely don't. But suddenly, she had this incredibly flashy new car. And even more bizarrely for a small-town farmer, she started traveling around the province in a helicopter.
A helicopter. I mean, that is a flagrant display of sudden capital.
It really is. And Fortunato, relying on their friendly history, actually asked her directly about it. He just said, "How are you getting so rich?"
And what did she say?
Her answer was a masterclass in deflection. She didn't offer a business plan or talk about some specific agricultural windfall. She just vaguely waved it away, claiming she had acquired a, quote, new business partner.
A new business partner.
Yeah. And as for the luxury car, she just told people she had borrowed it.
Borrowed it.
Right.
Which brings us to the 2022 mayoral election. And I really need to stress how bold her candidacy was here.
Oh, it was incredibly bold.
Yeah. Because Bamban wasn't a place with fluid, dynamic politics. It was run by this rigid, entrenched clique that had just been swapping the mayoral seat back and forth for decades.
Right. Usually the outgoing mayor would just point to his chosen successor after some backroom handshakes, and that was that.
Exactly. An outsider, let alone a young woman with no political family dynasty behind her, shouldn't have even registered on the ballot.
Yet she was completely unbothered by the establishment, and her campaign, I mean, it was something Bamban had literally never witnessed.
No kidding.
She didn't try to blend in with the older male politicians. She leaned entirely into her youth and her wealth. Her entire campaign was drenched in bubblegum pink.
Right. She drove a bright pink car through the dusty streets.
And at times, she literally descended from the sky into her political rallies in a helicopter painted with pink stripes.
The campaign materials are almost surreal to read about. The article describes a video she released to voters where she wakes up in this large bed, completely wrapped in a Sesame Street duvet.
Yes. And her fluffy little Pomeranian, which ironically was named Cash, is playfully bouncing on top of her.
It is aggressively weaponized cuteness.
It was brilliant psychological marketing, honestly. By presenting herself as this harmless, quirky, dog-loving young woman, she made herself entirely unthreatening to the political old guard.
Right. They didn't take her seriously as a threat.
Exactly. But simultaneously, she was signaling to the voters that she had the immense wealth necessary to actually get things done.
And the strategy worked flawlessly. She won the 2022 election. And almost overnight, the town seemed to enter a golden age.
Now, in the Philippines, a local mayor isn't just a ceremonial ribbon cutter. They hold significant structural power.
Right. We should clarify that. What kind of power are we talking about?
Immense power. Mayors in the Philippines control local business permitting, they manage the municipal budget, and crucially, they have direct operational oversight of the local police force.
Oh, wow. So a mayor can basically single-handedly clear the bureaucratic path for massive developments or just stall them indefinitely.
Exactly. And Guo presented herself as this hyper-competent workaholic. She reportedly sat at her desk from dawn until dusk.
And the economic metrics of the town skyrocketed. Fortunato pointed out that land values spiked. The Jollibee opened its doors in December 2022, quickly followed by the other fast food giants.
But those chicken restaurants weren't the real engine of this economic boom.
No, they weren't.
Yeah.
The real engine was being constructed right behind the mayor's office.
Right. In what had recently been empty fields, this massive, sprawling complex of 36 buildings suddenly materialized just before she took office.
And the official line circulating in town was that this new complex was a business process outsourcing hub, basically a call center.
But architecturally, it made absolutely no sense for Bamban.
Not at all.
These are gleaming, hyper-modern buildings, some reaching 7 stories high. They completely dwarfed the surrounding cinder block shacks.
And most suspiciously, this entire business park was surrounded by a high perimeter wall topped with razor wire. Wait, let's just pause and look at the basic logic of that. If a legitimate multinational company builds a massive 36-building call center in a town of 80,000 people, it should fundamentally transform the local labor market, right?
You would think so, yes.
I mean, half the young people in town should be walking through those gates every morning to man the phones. It would be the biggest employer for 100 miles.
But the reporting notes that only about 100 locals from Bamban were actually hired.
And what were they doing?
They were strictly relegated to cleaning the floors and maintaining the grounds. Nobody from the town was allowed near the actual computers.
That is just a glaring anomaly. The town was hosting a massive commercial enterprise, yet its citizens were entirely locked out of the core business operation.
Exactly.
It's like a company building a colossal automobile factory in your small town, but then they secretly import thousands of foreign workers to man the assembly line, put up barbed wire, and only let the locals take out the trash.
That's a perfect analogy.
So how did the people of Bamban, or the local authorities, not immediately demand to know what was happening inside those walls?
Because she flooded the town with so much material comfort that she effectively bought their collective silence.
Huh.
While Filipino political culture already expects a certain degree of patronage, Guo escalated it to an industrial scale.
Let's talk about her first Christmas as mayor, because this is wild.
Yes. So she invited the townspeople to gather outside this massive secretive compound, and then she systematically distributed thousands of her signature pink bags.
And what was inside?
They were filled with practical, highly valued groceries, whole hams, fruit juices, spaghetti sauces, fresh bread.
And the local councilors were given expensive bottles of Johnny Walker whiskey.
Right. It's basic human psychology. If the person holding the keys to the town is suddenly putting expensive ham on your Christmas table and bringing modern fast food to your main street, you are highly incentivized not to ask why the new office park needs razor wire.
Precisely. In the local vernacular, she wasn't curepot, meaning stingy. She was famously galante generous.
She provided a tangible, immediate improvement to their daily lives, which, created a profound cognitive dissonance when the truth finally bled out of the compound.
And that truth couldn't stay contained forever. The inciting incident that ultimately brought down this entire mirage happened in February 2024.
And it did not start with a meticulous audit. It started with a man running for his life.
The human reality inside those 36 buildings finally breached the walls. A young Vietnamese man named Minh Duc Nguyen literally threw himself out of a second-story window of one of the gleaming structures.
He hit the ground, managed to recover, and sprinted frantically toward a gap in the perimeter wall.
A security guard actually spotted him. The guard drew a gun and aimed it at him, but Nguyen just kept running.
He scrambled through a dried-out riverbed, tore across open agricultural fields, and just kept pushing until he collapsed onto the first piece of private property he could find.
Which happened to belong to a 76-year-old local farmer named Santa Maria.
And this elderly man looked at this terrified, battered foreigner and made the incredible decision to take him in.
Now, in a functioning municipality, you would expect the local police to arrive, offer medical aid, take the victim's statement, and immediately launch an investigation into the heavily fortified compound he just fled. Right.
You would certainly hope so. And the local Bamban police did arrive at Santa Maria's farm later that same day, but they were not there to investigate a crime.
No, they showed up acting like corporate fixers.
They were holding a printed affidavit, and they demanded that Nguyen sign this legal document, which explicitly promised that he would not file any criminal complaints against the company operating the compound.
The local police were actively running interference for the syndicate.
It's terrifying, but Santa Maria, the 76-year-old farmer, possessed an incredibly sharp moral intuition. He took the document inside to Nguyen, who vehemently refused to sign it. Seeing uniformed police officers act as debt collectors and fixers for this shady company deeply alarmed Santa Maria, so he went back to his gate and flatly refused to let the police onto his property.
Just think about the sheer courage that takes. An elderly man standing at his rural farm gate, staring down his own town's armed police force because he knows something is deeply wrong.
It is a profound act of civic bravery. And then Santa Maria made a phone call that would eventually dismantle the entire operation.
What did he call?
He reached out to his local pastor seeking guidance, and that pastor happened to have a contact in Manila at a very specific agency, the Presidential Anti-Organized Crime Commission, or the PAOCC.
This agency is fascinating. It was founded back in 1998, and it's this small, highly potent strike force primarily staffed by veteran police officers.
Right. And the call from the pastor lands on the desk of a senior investigator named Winston Casio.
Casio is one of the most compelling figures in this entire narrative.
He really is.
He does not fit the stereotype of a door-kicking, hard-boiled detective. He is actually an academic criminologist by training. He possesses a calm, deeply philosophical demeanor.
But the nature of his work, hunting down massive, infinitely wealthy criminal syndicates, is so extraordinarily dangerous that he literally sleeps on a cot in his secure office in Manila.
Because he has received so many assassination threats, he can no longer safely commute home.
Exactly. The reporter visits him in this bunker and paints such a vivid picture. Casio is hiding from hitmen, but the walls of his office are completely covered in vibrant contemporary art.
He has the soul of an aesthete.
Yeah, and he has this very dark, pragmatic sense of humor. He told the reporter, quite frankly, that he isn't some mythical, incorruptible hero.
Right, he joked that if a syndicate offered him 1 billion pesos, he'd probably take it. But he relies on his own personal financial independence to keep him insulated from the everyday bribes that compromise so many others.
So Casio gets the intelligence about a standoff in Bamban. He drives the 2 hours north from Manila and arrives at Santa Maria's farm gate.
And he walks into a highly tense scene.
The local Bamban police are still lingering outside the property, demanding entry. But Casio also notices a police colonel from Manila standing alongside them.
Casio immediately reads the board. He looks at the local cops, looks at the colonel, and realizes the corruption goes all the way up the chain.
The local police ask Casio to take the lead and escort them into the farm. Casio just shuts them down entirely.
What does he say?
He tells them no. Obviously, the farm owner does not trust you enough to allow you in. If they trusted you, you'd be inside by now.
He essentially draws a hard line in the sand, separating his federal authority from their compromised local jurisdiction.
And seeing Casio dismiss the local police, Santa Maria finally opens the gate and lets Casio and his PAOCC team inside.
Where Casio finds Nguyen pacing the farmhouse, wildly agitated, desperate to get to an airport and leave the country immediately.
But Casio needs evidence. He has to plead with this terrified man to stay just a few hours longer and explain exactly what was happening inside those 36 buildings.
And Nguyen finally agrees, saying he needs to expose the compound for the sake of his friends who are still trapped inside.
And over the next 3 hours, he outlines a reality that is completely disconnected from the bubblegum pink propaganda of the mayor.
Let's get into what he told them. Nguyen explained the mechanics of how he was trapped, right?
Yes. Weeks prior, while living in Vietnam, he had responded to an online job advertisement for a chef in the Philippines. The promised salary was 60,000 pesos a month, roughly $1,000.
Which, in the context of the Vietnamese labor market, is about 4 times the average wage.
It was an economic lure designed to be irresistible.
But the second he landed at the airport in Manila, the illusion evaporated. He was intercepted by handlers, driven straight up the highway to Bamban, and pushed inside that razor wire compound.
And it wasn't a pristine corporate call center. It was squalid.
Nguyen described the walls being caked in thick, yellow nicotine stains because the supervisors, who were all Chinese nationals, chain-smoked relentlessly while patrolling the floors.
And he certainly wasn't there to cook.
No. Bamban's crown jewel of commercial real estate was actually a massive industrialized scam compound.
And to understand the gravity of this, you have to realize this wasn't a localized anomaly.
Right. It was one node in a sprawling multinational scam industry that has metastasized across Southeast Asia, generating staggering amounts of illicit wealth.
Let's really dig into the mechanics of what they were doing in there, because it affects people listening to this right now. The primary operation they were running is known in the criminal underworld as pig butchering.
Pig butchering. I want you to think about this. Have you ever received a random text on your phone that says something like, "Hi, is this my tour guide?" Or, "Sorry, wrong number, but you seem like a nice person."
Oh, all the time. And that exact text is the opening hook of a pig butchering scam.
And it is likely being sent by a trafficked worker sitting in a compound exactly like the one in Bamban.
Pig butchering is not a quick smash and grab fraud. It is a grueling, long con psychological operation.
Right. The workers inside these compounds are given scripts and forced to create highly curated, fake profiles on social media platforms, WhatsApp, and dating apps like Tinder or Bumble.
They pose as attractive, wealthy, highly successful individuals.
And then they just talk to the victim for months.
Yeah.
They don't ask for money right away. They ask about the victim's day, their family, their stresses.
They build deep emotional intimacy. Sometimes it's romantic, sometimes it's just a mentor-mentee relationship.
They are slowly, meticulously fattening the pig.
Exactly. They isolate the victim emotionally, becoming a central pillar of their daily life. Only when complete trust is established do they introduce the financial lever.
How do they do that?
They casually mention a lucrative investment opportunity they've been utilizing, almost always involving cryptocurrency or a fake trading platform that the syndicate actually controls.
They convince the victim to invest a small amount, and the fake platform shows massive returns.
The victim withdraws a little bit of profit, which cements their belief that it's real. Then, the scammer persuades them to mortgage their house, drain their 401k, and borrow from friends to maximize this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
And once the victim has literally nothing left to give, the scammer vanishes. The fake platform goes dark. The money is gone forever. The pig has been butchered.
And because these compounds have thousands of workers operating 24 hours a day in shifts, managing dozens of victims simultaneously, the scale of capital extraction is almost unfathomable.
The global scam industry is now estimated to pull in $500 billion a year. $500 billion.
To comprehend how a $500 billion criminal enterprise found a secure operating base in the rural Philippines, we have to trace the geopolitical migration of these syndicates.
Right, they didn't just appear out of nowhere.
Back in the 2010s, the Chinese government initiated a massive, relentless crackdown on organized crime and money laundering networks operating out of Macau, which was previously the undisputed gambling capital of Asia.
So the heat got too high, and the syndicates had to pack up and find new territory.
Yes. They scattered southward across the region. They initially established footholds in countries with highly porous rule of law, like Cambodia and Laos, or in conflict zones like Myanmar,
where local warlords offered military protection for a cut of the profits.
But operating in lawless areas has infrastructural limits. To scale up, they needed access to the high-speed internet and banking infrastructure of more developed democracies.
They were looking for a loophole.
And the Philippines handed them that loophole on a silver platter in 2016. At the time, Rodrigo Duterte was president.
Now, internet gambling is strictly illegal within mainland China. However, for years, the Philippines have been quietly hosting online casino operators that streamed live baccarat and poker games back to Chinese citizens.
Operating in a sort of tolerated legal gray zone, Duterte decided to formally regulate and tax this industry. He legalized them under a specific license. The Philippine Offshore Gaming Operator, or POGO.
The domestic justification for legalizing POGOs was purely economic, right?
Yeah. The government argued it would stimulate the commercial real estate market, create secondary jobs for Filipinos, and generate massive tax revenues for the state.
But the structural reality of a POGO license provided the ultimate Trojan horse for the migrating Macau syndicates.
Exactly.
But wait, how does a license for online poker hide a massive crypto scamming operation? If an inspector walks in, shouldn't they be able to tell the difference between a casino and a fraud center?
Not at a passing glance, which is exactly why the loophole was so devastating. The physical and digital infrastructure required to run a massive online gambling platform is virtually identical to the infrastructure required to run a global crypto scam operation.
Because both require massive server farms, high-bandwidth fiber optic cables, thousands of computer terminals,
encrypted international data routing, and hundreds of workers sitting at desks staring at screens.
So if a local police officer or a building inspector walks through the door, all they see is a sea of computers and fiber optic cables.
The syndicate holds up their legitimate, government-stamped POGO license, and the inspector walks away, completely oblivious to the fact that the software running on those screens is draining the life savings of someone in Ohio.
By legalizing the hardware and the operational footprint, the Philippine government inadvertently gave these transnational syndicates state-sanctioned camouflage.
The syndicates flooded into Manila, bought up entire office towers, and acquired POGO licenses. But they quickly realized that running fake crypto platforms and pig butchering scams was exponentially more profitable and carried less overhead than running actual online casinos.
And the regulatory oversight was shockingly negligent. In the case of BamBan, the national regulatory body responsible for auditing POGOs literally had an office inside the BamBan compound.
They were regulating the scammers from inside the scammer's own fortress. It's mind-boggling.
Which brings us back to the horrifying human reality that Nguyen described. You don't build a $500 billion industry without a massive labor force.
And while some scammers are willing participants drawn by high wages, the sheer volume of bodies required by the syndicates necessitates industrial-scale human trafficking.
The source material is very plain in its description of the coercion used to enforce compliance.
When Nguyen realized the true nature of his employment and requested to leave, or when he complained about the deplorable living conditions, he wasn't simply fired.
No, he was subjected to violent retribution.
In his sworn testimony, he detailed being physically struck by his supervisors with such force that he was incapable of eating for 2 days.
He was beaten just for asking to go home.
And his experience was not unique. It was systemic. Nguyen told Casio that the auditory environment of the compound was defined by the continuous echoes of people screaming in pain as they were punished.
But the architectural design of the compound, the thick concrete walls, the strategic setback from the main road, and the razor wire ensured that those screams were completely absorbed.
They never reached the ears of the people eating fast food on the streets of Bamban.
So Casio takes this entire horrifying 3-hour statement from Nguyen, and Casio realizes he finally has the legal lever he needs.
Because Casio already suspected what was happening in Bamban. Over the previous summer, in 2023, Casio and his PAOCC cyber team had successfully infiltrated various private Telegram channels.
Channels that were being used by the middle managers of these scam compounds across the country.
The arrogance displayed on those encrypted channels was staggering. The syndicate managers weren't just coordinating logistics, they were actively bragging about their brutality.
They posted high-definition videos of themselves violently abusing their captive workforce.
They shared footage of workers being systematically beaten with pipes or electrocuted with stun batons as punishment for failing to extract enough money from victims or for attempting to escape.
Casio told a reporter that to call the footage gruesome was a massive understatement. And crucial to the timeline, Casio had recognized the interior backgrounds of some of those torture videos.
He knew they were filmed inside the specific buildings in Bamban, but knowing it and proving it to a judge are two different things.
He needed a first-hand witness to secure a search warrant. Nalan's escape provided that exact legal foundation.
So, on March 12, 2024, a judge finally signs the paperwork authorizing a massive multi-agency raid on the Bamban compound. Casio and his tactical units prepare to breach the gates at dawn.
But this is where the sheer reach of the syndicates becomes apparent. The night before the raid is scheduled to execute, Casio's phone rings.
It's his superior at the PAOCC. Someone, somewhere deep inside the Philippine judicial or law enforcement apparatus, has leaked the operational intelligence.
The bosses inside the Bamban compound have been warned that the hammer's about to fall, and they are actively initiating an evacuation.
Casio described the next few hours to the reporter as a frantic Mad Max dash.
He and his heavily armed tactical team throw themselves into their vehicles and just tear up the northbound motorway from Manila, driving wildly through the night, desperately trying to beat the clock.
But the leak gave the syndicates too much of a head start. When Casio's team finally rams through the gates and breaches the compound, they are met with eerie silence.
It is a technological ghost town.
They clear building after building, finding dozens of massive operations floors. The air conditioning is still blasting.
More than 2,000 computer monitors are still glowing, actively running the scamming software and fake WhatsApp profiles.
But the thousands of trafficked workers and the chain-smoking enforcers who beat them have vanished completely into the night.
It must have been infuriating. But the panic of the evacuation was actually a massive tactical error by the syndicates. They fled so quickly they couldn't sanitize the site.
They left the paper trail intact. And as Casio's investigators fan out across the 36 buildings, they finally breach the inner sanctum.
They discover how the syndicate bosses were actually living right behind the mayor's office.
The juxtaposition between the squalid, nicotine-stained dormitories of the trafficked workers and the quarters of the executive leadership was grotesque.
Inside the perimeter walls, shielded from public view, the bosses have constructed palatial residential villas.
Investigators found an Olympic-sized swimming pool. There were fully stocked internal convenience stores and a high-end, fully operational dim sum restaurant that catered exclusively to the leadership.
The reporter who wrote this article actually got to walk through one of the primary villas months later, and the details are just absurd. You walk up to this villa, and there are abandoned BMWs and Mercedes-Benzes just sitting in the driveway.
You step through the front door, and the entrance hall is dominated by this colossal, elaborately carved wooden altar displaying 11 different Chinese deities.
And the luxury only escalated. Beneath that altar in the basement level, investigators found a private karaoke room outfitted with high-end audio equipment large enough to entertain 50 guests.
Moving up to the top floor, the master bedroom was larger than a typical family home, featuring doors that open onto a private balcony equipped with its own personal swimming pool.
This specific, sprawling villa belonged to a man named Huang Jiang. He was a Chinese businessman hailing from Fujian province.
Casio's intelligence identified him as one of the apex bosses of the Bamban operation, a man suspected of coordinating multiple scam hubs across the Philippine archipelago.
But Huang Jiang wasn't captured in the raid, and the method of his escape highlights the extreme lengths these syndicates went to secure their operations.
When Casio's team pulled the compound's internal CCTV footage, they watched the raid unfold from the syndicate's perspective.
As the tactical teams were breaching the front gates, the footage showed Huang Jiang calmly descending into his basement, entering a concealed secret tunnel, and escaping the perimeter.
He literally took a secret underground tunnel to a waiting helicopter. It is straight out of a James Bond villain's playbook.
But you can see the sheer panic of his final moments and what he left behind. The reporter notes that his luxurious sitting room was littered with English language textbooks.
And in his massive bathroom, investigators found huge boxes of antacids just piled up. Clearly, the psychological stress of managing a transnational empire of fraud and torture was destroying his stomach lining.
While Wang Xiang managed to fly away, the documents he abandoned in his hasty retreat proved to be the syndicate's undoing.
As Casio's forensics team began meticulously cataloging the paperwork left in the executive offices, they found a distinct, undeniable trail of signatures.
And that trail led directly out of the compound, across the empty fields, and straight onto the bubblegum pink desk of Mayor Alice Guo.
This was the absolute smoking gun. We aren't talking about vague associations. Investigators found a staggering 15 million peso electricity bill for the scam compound.
And it was registered in Alice Guo's name.
They unearthed corporate co-ownership documents proving she was a primary stakeholder in the real estate company that explicitly leased the land to the scam center.
They even found the original 2020 application for the compound's POGO license, personally submitted by her.
The financial forensics were even more damning. When the Anti-Money Laundering Council subpoenaed her banking records, they discovered she had direct control over 36 separate bank accounts.
Between 2006 and the time of the raid in 2024, more than $76 million had been aggressively cycled through those accounts.
To put that in perspective, laundering that volume of capital requires immense sophistication, moving funds through shell companies, breaking deposits into thresholds just below reporting limits, and rapidly transferring assets across borders to obscure the origin.
Furthermore, records showed she had wired over $1 million directly to entities in mainland China. The carefully curated persona of the simple, hardworking farm girl who just wanted to improve her town completely disintegrated.
The exposure of these documents triggered an absolute political earthquake in Manila.
The Philippine Senate immediately convened a high-level investigative committee to determine how a massive criminal enterprise had seemingly captured an entire municipality.
And they subpoenaed Mayor Guo to testify under oath. The televised hearings were spearheaded by a very sharp, relentless politician named Senator Risa Hontiveros.
Senator Hontiveros recognized that the financial crimes were only the surface layer of the deception. She began methodically probing the glaring anomalies in Guo's foundational identity.
Her birth certificates, the lack of medical records, the complete absence of her supposed parents' marriage certificates.
But when confronted with these discrepancies, Guo did not mount a vigorous defense. She employed a bizarre strategy of complete aggressive vagueness.
The footage of this is wild. You have this woman who supposedly orchestrated a $76 million real estate and political empire, and when asked basic foundational questions like, where did you live when you were 10, or what was your mother's maiden name?
She would just stare blankly and repeat a single phrase, I don't know, Your Honor.
Senator Hontiveros later noted that it was this precise, robotic evasiveness that convinced her a much deeper conspiracy was at play. A normal person can recall their childhood home or their primary school teachers.
Guo couldn't recall a single coherent memory from her youth. And because these hearings were broadcast nationally, the Philippine public became obsessed.
It became a massive cultural phenomenon. Clips of her squirming in the Senate chair, stonewalling with, I don't know, Your Honor, went wildly viral on TikTok.
DJs in Manila's nightclubs were literally sampling her testimony and remixing it into heavy bass dance tracks. She became a national meme.
But while the internet was making memes, Senate investigators and investigative journalists were digging deep into national immigration and archival records.
And what they unearthed completely shattered her entire fabricated existence. They discovered that the Philippine government had no record of an Alice Guo being born on the date she claimed.
In fact, her birth certificate wasn't filed with the state until she was 19 years old.
A delayed registration of birth is a real thing in remote, impoverished areas where people are born at home, but for a wealthy business family. Unheard of.
Exactly. When she finally filed it at 19, the certificate claimed she was the biological child of a Filipino father and a Filipino mother.
But when investigators searched the national census, tax records, and civil registries, they could not find a single shred of evidence that either of those two parents had ever existed.
They were completely fabricated phantoms.
The Senate finally drops the absolute bombshell on live television. The beloved pink-clad mayor of Bamban was not Alice Guo. Her real name was Guo Huaping.
And she wasn't born on a pig farm in the Philippines. She was born in Fujian, a coastal province in southern China.
Immigration manifest proves she had entered the Philippines when she was 8 years old, utilizing a Chinese passport, traveling alongside her actual biological parents, both of whom were Chinese citizens.
The investigative reporting went even further, tracking down her former classmates from Grace Christian College, an exclusive school in Manila catering to affluent Filipino-Chinese families.
These classmates went on the record confirming that when Guo Huaping first enrolled, she couldn't speak a single word of Tagalog or English. She communicated entirely in Mandarin.
Okay, let's stop and really look at the magnitude of what this means. If she isn't a local farmer, if her Filipino parents are ghosts, if she isn't even a legal citizen of the country, then who the hell did the people of Bamban elect?
And more importantly, who financed her bubblegum pink political ascent? This realization completely pivots the entire investigation.
We are no longer looking at a corrupt local politician taking bribes to look the other way.
We are looking at a scenario where a transnational criminal syndicate literally manufactured a politician from scratch and installed her into a democratic government.
Once the Senate exposed her true identity and the depth of her fraud, Guo Huaping abandoned the hearings. She stopped responding to all committee summons.
The Senate officially issued a subpoena, which she ignored. Consequently, the Senate issued a warrant for her immediate arrest.
But when units of the Philippine National Police descended on her various registered addresses, they found empty rooms.
She executed a flawless vanishing act. She completely ghosted the national law enforcement apparatus.
We only found out later, through immigration tracking, that she had been covertly smuggled out of the Philippines. She slipped into Malaysia, then moved onward to Singapore, and finally attempted to hide out in Indonesia.
She managed to evade capture until September 2024, when Indonesian authorities finally apprehended her on the outskirts of Jakarta and extradited her back to Manila.
But even as she was paraded in front of the cameras in a detainee uniform, the central, terrifying mystery remained unsolved.
Why would a Chinese national go to the immense trouble and expense of fabricating an identity just to become the mayor of a dusty provincial Philippine town?
And nature abhors a vacuum. Into this void of concrete answers, a sensational rumor exploded, gripping the entire nation.
Yes, the spy rumor. And it is incredibly cinematic. A few weeks after her arrest in Indonesia, the news network Al Jazeera aired a documentary.
It featured a prison interview with a Chinese tycoon named Xi Jinping. Now, she was currently sitting in a Thai prison cell, fighting extradition, facing severe accusations of operating his own massive, illegal, offshore gambling and scamming empire.
But in this documentary, she looks directly into the camera and makes an astonishing claim. That singular allegation set the Philippine political and media establishment on fire.
When Guo was dragged from her jail cell to face questioning in the lower house of Congress, lawmakers confronted her with the documentary.
And for the first time in months, the stoic, robotic, Your Honor facade completely cracked. She lost her temper.
She became visibly enraged, fiercely insisting, "I'm not a spy," and aggressively threatening to file defamation lawsuits against both Al Jazeera and Xi Jinping.
But in the court of public opinion, the damage was instantaneous.
But we need to look at what the actual organized crime investigators, the people tracking the money, and the syndicates think about this. The article and the experts it cites dissect this espionage claim meticulously.
And they treat it exactly as we should, as a highly sensational, entirely unsupported allegation made by a desperate criminal facing a lengthy prison sentence.
I completely agree with the investigators here. The spy rumor makes for a fantastic Netflix script, but logically it falls apart under basic scrutiny.
Let's look at the behavior of the Chinese state. Beijing has been aggressively hunting down these exact scam syndicates for years.
Primarily because the victims being bled dry in these pig butchering scams are very often Chinese citizens living on the mainland. The Chinese government has literally executed captured scam bosses.
It makes zero strategic sense.
Exactly. Furthermore, analyze her evasion tactics. If you are a highly trained intelligence operative whose deep cover has just been blown on international television, your handlers do not leave you to fend for yourself.
They exfiltrate you immediately. You flee straight back to mainland China for state protection.
Guo Huaping did not do that. She bounced erratically around Southeast Asia, from Malaysia to Singapore to Indonesia, desperately trying to stay one step ahead of international police.
That is the erratic, improvisational behavior of a fugitive criminal syndicalist, not a protected asset of a global superpower.
The spy rumor is the ultimate red herring. It distracts everyone with a sexy geopolitical thriller plot while obscuring a reality that is actually much more systemic and terrifying.
We aren't dealing with James Bond and state espionage. We are dealing with a transnational criminal enterprise that possesses so much liquid, untraceable capital that they can literally purchase a town's government to act as a physical firewall for their server farms.
Which brings the investigation back to its core focus, led by Senator Sherwin Gachalian. He was the one diligently trying to trace the actual hierarchy.
If she isn't a spy, how does a young woman from Fujian end up in a business partnership with apex criminal overlords like Huang Jiang, the man who fled through the secret tunnel leaving behind boxes of Louis XIII cognac?
The Senate investigators started aggressively following the corporate filings connected to the Bamban real estate, and they untangled a web of shell companies linking the scam center to a prominent Chinese businessman named Lin Wexiang.
And this is where it gets incredibly tense, because Lin's primary business partner was a man named Michael Yang.
The introduction of Michael Yang into the investigative record dramatically escalated the political stakes. Michael Yang was not an anonymous figure. He had previously served as a formal economic advisor to former President Rodrigo Duterte.
Now, it is imperative to state clearly that Yang's legal counsel vehemently and categorically denies any connection whatsoever between Yang and Alice Guo or the illicit POGO industry in general.
His lawyers maintain that any connections drawn by investigators are fleeting and inconsequential, and to date, no criminal charges have been filed against him regarding Bamban.
Right, but for investigators like Winston Casio, who strongly suspect that Yang was the original architect who pitched Duterte on the idea of legalizing POJOs back in 2016, seeing his name adjacent to the Bamban corporate network in any capacity was deeply alarming.
But the critical missing link was Guo herself. How did she penetrate this elite circle of billionaires and political insiders?
When pressed by the Senate, her explanation was laughably weak. She claimed she merely met Huang Jiang because he owned a few restaurants and she was a pig farmer trying to sell him meat, and they simply hit it off, leading her to suggest he build a 36-building mega-complex on her empty fields.
Which is an insult to everyone's intelligence. You don't go from selling pork ribs to laundering $76 million because of a friendly chat.
Precisely. It lacks all credibility. Senator Gachalian, looking at the holistic picture, developed a much more plausible theory regarding the true architect of this conspiracy.
He pointed to Alice's father, Guo Jianyam. The father and his brother had successfully built various businesses in Fujian before migrating their operations to the Philippines in the late 1990s.
And this is where the investigative journalists at the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, the OCCRP, unearthed a vital piece of the puzzle regarding their social network.
This detail is amazing because it shows how these networks actually function in the real world. The OCCRP dug up records of a specific clan association meeting.
It was held in Hong Kong in 2019, organized for expatriate Chinese businessmen who all hailed from one specific village in Fujian called Lukang.
And when investigators looked at the list of VIP financial sponsors for this private event, they found Lin Wexiang, Michael Yang, and Alice Guo's uncle all listed together.
The specifics of the donation logs are incredibly revealing about their shared social strata. Yang and Lin each made financial contributions of roughly $6,000 to the event.
Guo's uncle contributed massive quantities of high-end ginseng powder and Peruvian maca herbs highly prized by affluent businessmen for their reputed properties regarding vitality and virility.
Furthermore, Alice's father, Guo Jianjiang, was revealed to be a major long-term patron of this exact clan association, having donated roughly $60,000 over the previous decade.
They weren't strangers. They were all actively moving and mingling in the exact same distinct, highly exclusive social and financial circles.
So Senator Gachalian takes all this and forms a hypothesis, let's call it the proxy theory.
He suspects that Guo's father was playing an incredibly patient, multi-decade-long game. He brings his daughter over from China when she's 8 years old, but he doesn't immediately thrust her into business.
He waits. He fully assimilates her into the local provincial culture. He ensures her Tagalog is flawless, that she understands the nuanced patriarchal social dynamics of Philippine rural life.
And then, once she is perfectly camouflaged as a local, he positions her to serve as a high-level proxy and fixer for his syndicate connections.
The theory posits that her designated function was to serve as the clean, perfectly assimilated local face of the operation.
She would utilize the syndicate's massive capital to quietly acquire vast tracts of agricultural land, masking the true source of the funds. She would schmooze the local town elders, building unshakable political capital.
She would run for office to ensure the local police force remained compliant. And in exchange for engineering this impenetrable state-backed camouflage, she and her family received immense political power, physical protection, and a lucrative percentage of the compound's massive profits.
Now, I have to push back just slightly on the intentionality of this. You're telling me a businessman brought an 8-year-old girl over, stripped her of her true identity, and just waited 20 years in the hopes she might eventually become useful for a cyber scam compound that didn't even exist yet.
That borders on science fiction. Are investigators seriously suggesting she was a toddler sleeper agent?
That is an excellent point of clarification. Investigators aren't suggesting the father foresaw the invention of cryptocurrency and pig butchering scams in the late 1990s.
The long game was about creating a versatile, deeply embedded local proxy.
In transnational organized crime, having a completely assimilated, trusted local operator who can buy land and influence politicians is the most valuable asset you can possess, regardless of what the specific illicit business ends up being, whether it's smuggling, illegal logging, or eventually cyber fraud.
They built the proxy first, and when the POGO loophole opened up decades later, she was the perfect tool perfectly positioned to exploit it.
That makes much more sense. It's opportunistic grooming rather than a 20-year master plan for a specific crime.
And this fundamentally changes how we need to conceptualize modern organized crime. When most people think of the mob, they think of the 20th century models.
We picture La Cosa Nostra, or the traditional Yakuza or triads. We imagine strict, rigid hierarchies, a godfather at the apex giving direct orders to tattooed enforcers at the bottom, blood oaths of loyalty define territories.
But law enforcement experts emphasize that the Bam Bam operation represents the evolution of crime into what they term a criminal gig economy.
The structural model of these modern syndicates mirrors Silicon Valley venture capitalism far more than it resembles a traditional mafia family.
Yes, it operates like a dark web version of Uber or Airbnb. You have these entirely insulated angel investors sitting safely in mainland China or Dubai.
They never touch a scam, and their names never even register on a police database. They simply provide massive pools of liquid seed funding to a loose network of criminal entrepreneurs, mid-level operators like Huang Jiang.
These entrepreneurs operate fluidly and opportunistically. There are no blood oaths.
Sometimes they fiercely compete with each other for territory. Sometimes they syndicate their risk and collaborate on a massive joint venture, like the mega compound in Bam Bam.
The venture capitalists provide the funding and the proprietary app, the scamming software and server infrastructure.
And instead of maintaining a standing army of loyal, sworn foot soldiers, which carries massive overhead and risk, they simply exploit a fluid, completely disposable labor force of trafficked workers to execute the daily grind of the scams.
It is decentralized, highly capitalized, and terrifyingly agile. If a police raid takes down a compound, the venture capitalists just absorb the loss, fire up a new server in a different country, and hire a new entrepreneur.
And their ability to manipulate local populations through economic leverage is just chilling.
Let's fast forward to 2025. I want to take you back to Bam Bam. After everything we've just discussed, after the dramatic raid, the exposure of the torture chambers, the revelation that their beloved mayor was a fabricated citizen running a global human trafficking hub, you would assume the town would be burning her campaign materials in the streets in absolute disgust.
The logical assumption is that the town would feel deeply betrayed. But the reality on the ground in Bam Bam is completely discordant with the verified facts of the criminal case.
In 2025, more than a year after this story made global headlines, there are still vibrant banners hanging proudly around the town expressing deep, unwavering support for Alice Guo.
The reporter actually traveled back to Bam Bam and found that the current acting mayor, a man named Leonardo Ding Annunciation, wasn't distancing himself from the scandal.
He was actively surfing on Guo's lingering popularity. On July 12th, which remember is the entirely fake birthday listed on Guo's fraudulent birth certificate, the acting mayor posted a photo on his official Facebook page.
The photo showed him standing warmly next to Guo. They are both smiling, holding a celebratory cake that is literally decorated with frosting dollar signs.
His caption simply read, "Happy birthday to an amazing person."
To understand this profound psychological disconnect, we have to examine a deep pre-colonial cultural current in the region.
Anthropologists and political scientists point to a concept in Philippine society known as kaginawan.
It is a belief system where the primary, sometimes sole metric of good governance is the direct provision of material well-being, relief, and tangible comfort to the populace.
Right. So through the lens of Kaginhawan, the geopolitics and the legality are irrelevant. To many voters in Bamban, it literally doesn't matter if she was born in Fujian, or if she faked her citizenship, or if foreign nationals were being beaten with pipes behind the razor wire.
What mattered entirely was their immediate lived reality. She brought the Jollibee to the town center. She handed out pink bags of ham and spaghetti sauce when they were hungry.
She provided Kaginhawan. The macroeconomic reality of the town improved under her watch. Therefore, she was a good leader.
It is a devastating indictment of how systemic poverty and economic vulnerability can be effortlessly weaponized by syndicates with deep pockets. They didn't need to threaten the town, they just needed to feed it.
And when we zoom out to look at the broader pursuit of justice in this massive conspiracy, the picture remains incredibly bleak.
Let's run down the accountability scorecard as of late 2025. Yes, Alice Aguo was eventually found guilty and sentenced to life in prison for facilitating massive fraud and human trafficking.
But look at the staggering systemic failure of justice surrounding every other node in the network. What happened to Huang Zheng, the apex boss with the secret escape tunnel?
He vanished into the ether. Intelligence reports indicated he spent time in Cambodia before relocating to Taiwan.
And yet, to this day, the Philippine government has inexplicably failed to even apply for an Interpol Red Notice to mandate his international arrest. He is essentially a free man.
What about the government immigration officials who originally stamped and approved Guo's fabricated paperwork decades ago, enabling this entire infiltration, completely untouched?
What about the government POGO regulators, who literally maintained a working office inside the scam compound while people were being tortured in the adjacent building? Zero consequences.
When the reporter reached out to them for this article, they didn't even bother to respond with a no comment.
Even down at the local municipal level, the concept of accountability is entirely superficial. The entire Bamban police force, the specific officers who arrived at the farm and tried to coerce the escaping victim into signing a gag order to protect the syndicate, were officially relieved of their duty.
Which sounds like they were fired, but they weren't, were they?
Not at all. They were not prosecuted for corruption or obstruction of justice. According to the reporting, they were simply required to complete a brief refresher course on policing and were then quietly reassigned to other police stations within the same province.
The institutional rot remained completely intact.
It is a culture of absolute brazen impunity, and the psychological toll that takes on the few honest investigators who actually try to dismantle these networks is heartbreaking.
Look at Winston Casio, the aesthete in the bunker. For a long time, his agency, the PAOCC, was the only federal entity seriously combating these syndicates.
Their raids were so aggressive and generated so much undeniable public outrage that they actually forced President Marcos to officially ban all POGO operations nationwide in July 2024.
But revoking the legal license did not eradicate the criminality. Many of these massive scam hubs simply absorbed the friction, packed up their servers, and relocated to more remote, deeply impoverished northern provinces of the Philippines where media attention and police scrutiny are practically non-existent.
As Casio bleakly noted, no one wants to talk about these new compounds because they remain fiercely protected by powerful, entrenched local political elites.
And the political winds in Manila quickly shifted against Casio's agency for being too effective. In 2025, the Marcos administration suddenly and inexplicably transferred the head of the PAOCC, Gilbert Cruz, demoting him to a bureaucratic role at the Department of Transport.
Casio himself was subsequently sent a very pointed administrative letter explicitly reminding him that his own employment contract was strictly tied to Cruz's tenure.
Casio is an incredibly intelligent man. He read the writing on the wall. He feared the PAOCC was being intentionally defanged, slowly turned into a paper tiger, because their relentless raids had inconvenient syndicates with impossibly deep pockets and powerful political connections in the capital.
Unwilling to compromise his integrity, Casio chose to step away. He resigned. Now, it is important to note that the new leadership of the PAOCC strongly disputes Casio's characterization, publicly insisting they are still aggressively fighting organized crime and actively pushing for robust, new anti-POGO legislation.
But Casio's final conversation with the reporter provides a truly chilling conclusion to this entire saga. Before he left, he admitted that a few of the largest, most sophisticated scam syndicates have already successfully evolved.
They have completely dropped the POGO facade and rebranded themselves as mundane, legitimate corporate entities, tech support centers, standard BPOs.
But behind closed doors, they are still quietly running massive, highly lucrative pig-butchering operations.
And when the reporter asked Casio the obvious question why he wasn't submitting this specific intelligence to other federal law enforcement agencies so they could execute raids, his answer was devastating in its honesty.
He said he was literally afraid to report them. He feared that if he handed over the target packages, he would inevitably discover that the receiving law enforcement agency had already been bought and paid for by the scammers.
He told the reporter, "I'd rather not put my neck on the line. I don't know who to trust."
When the top organized crime investigator in the country tells you he doesn't know which cops are on the syndicate's payroll, you know the corruption has reached the bone.
Which leaves us with a deeply unsettling final thought to mull over. If a transnational criminal gig economy armed with venture capital, encrypted communications, and a masterful understanding of local corruption can successfully install a fabricated citizen as a mayor and use her to run a multi-million-dollar human trafficking and scam compound in broad daylight, what happens when these syndicates decide that local municipal politics just isn't enough?
What happens when they decide to aim their immense, untraceable wealth at national offices?
How many other Alice Gokos are currently out there, waiting in the wings, quietly building their perfect bubblegum pink campaigns? Thanks for listening. Follow us for daily insights into world affairs, and don't forget to like, comment, and share.